Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. You got Kramzer here. I am with Joe and Jason, about to go through the discography and rank the albums of Don't Call 'Em Grunge, the Stone Temple Pilots. Joe, you're a huge STP fan. What do they mean to you?
Well, funny you should ask, Ryan. SDP was the first modern band that I ever liked. I was really not into anything new, and this is a ways back. We're talking 2000s. And then I heard a little song on the radio called Sour Girl, and it kind of changed my life as far as opening up my eyes to, what modern artists could do. It got me exploring music kind of in a way that I never had before, and kind of led to me picking up the bass and later guitar, and just kind of, they were really the catalyst, I think, for my entire love of music. So they have a really special place in my heart, and it sucks that Scott Weiland died, but we were here to celebrate their music.
Sour Girl was your gateway track, huh?
It was just something I, heard on the radio, just, on the local alternative station here. And it didn't sound like anything else on the radio at the time. It's that kind of throwback, almost McCartney-esque bass line, just a really cool, different sounding song. And it just got my mind exploded right there.
Jason, you and Joe, history as bass players. Obviously, a mark on STP is DeLeo on bass.
Yeah, he's a great bass player. Eric Kratz, a great drummer, really tight rhythm section. I think Dean DeLeo is extremely underrated guitar player as well. STP has always been a band that I've liked. I don't really remember like a specific moment getting into them. They've just kind of always been there. I don't know that there was ever a time that I would have, ranked them among my favorite bands, but I've always enjoyed them, always thought highly of them. I always thought they were kind of unfairly criticized, especially among rock critics. I don't really think they get their due. People lump them in with like a lot of the grunge bands like Pearl Jam or Nirvana, like riding their coattails. But I think maybe there might have been some truth to that early on with like Core, but within a few albums, they really carved out a sound of their own.
Yeah, they even kind of took a little bit of offense to the grunge label. Core definitely, I think, falls in that realm, like you were saying. But after that, I think they're doing stuff that no one else is really doing in the mid-'90s. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all about DeLeo on bass and the rhythm section. They get a lot of likening to Zeppelin because of the way that rhythm section works. And Weiland's awesome. He's one of the best frontmen of the '90s. He's a chameleon. He can do so many different things with his voice. Tremendous stage presence. So let's get right into it. Let's start with Joe, bringing up the rear with your eighth favorite, Stone Temple Pilots album. We're not counting, by the way, the one with Chester from Linkin Park. I think it's officially an EP.
Yeah.
So we're skipping that one. So we're going with 8.
I also want to mention that we're not counting the talk show record, which came out in between Tiny Music and number 4. It's all the members of STP with a different singer. So it's in a way as much of an STP record as the 2 most recent, but it's not STP in name, so we're not counting it. It is awesome though. Came out kind of around the peak of their playing and their writing, and it's really awesome. The singer on there doesn't try to imitate Scott Weiland. He's got his own sound. It's really good. The songwriting's really strong. Highly recommend it. If you don't know that record, go check it out. But we're not counting it. We're just counting 8 records today.
Other decent offshoots too, like Velvet Revolver and Army of Anyone. But yeah, if it doesn't have the name Stone Temple Pilots on it, we are not counting it today.
And that brings us to, I think, the album probably we're all going to have at the bottom, Perdida, with their new singer Jeff Gutt. And it's kind of a weird concept album. It's them on a bunch of old acoustic vintage instruments. It just doesn't have the fire and the driving rhythm that you want in an STP record. I mean, that's kind of why you come for SDP. And it's pleasant enough. It doesn't really play to the band's strengths though, and it's a little sappy, I think. Some of the lyrics, not quite. I mean, it's not Scott Weiland, so it's kind of missing that weirdness that I think he brought to the band. I like Miles Away. Losing Your Heart has a nice vocal performance, but it's just not great. It's fine. It doesn't sound like an STP record, and I think people who want to hear an STP record are not going to want to hear this one.
Yeah, this record, I don't really get it. I don't get what they're trying to do with it, especially with a new singer. You come out with one album that's pretty decent, but it doesn't really make much of a dent in terms of chart success or album sales. I don't think this record is the way to like convince people that this new version of STP is gonna be something they want to invest their time or money in. First track starts out pretty good. I like the chord progression on it. Very quickly, this album becomes a slog. Hard to get through, pretty boring.
I see where you guys are coming from, but I don't think they are trying to convince people anything. I think they're kind of doing this just for themselves, which is why it's not my number 8. My number 8 is going to be the self-titled album from 2018. There's nothing inherently wrong with this album. It kind of annoys me that Jeff Gutt's just kind of doing a lot of a Scott Weiland impersonation here. I really don't like when artists kind of tackle that. I think it worked with AC/DC kind of, but there are not too many examples of when just kind of a new same guy comes in, new same singer. Doesn't really enthrall me that much. To me, there's some good songs on here. I like Roll Me Under. I like Just a Little Lie. But right now it seems like we've already heard all these STP songs at all. They're not as good as the Scott Weiland sound of these songs. To me, it's sort of like it's a slightly different dimension where it's not Scott Weiland and all the songs are very reminiscent of the other STP stuff, but they're just not nearly as good. I don't like Guts' performance. All of his verses and choices he makes are all kind of the same and very safe. But, you know, the guys know how to be STP. They know how to do that hook-heavy rock. So it's definitely not a bad listen. You know, Middle of Nowhere is okay. I just don't think that there's anything that you could get rid of this album and your opinion of STP would be exactly the same for good or worse. It's just kind of a throwaway album for me.
Okay, well, that's my 7th favorite, Stone Temple Pilots from 2018. The first one with Gut, like Kramzer said, it sounds eerily close to a Stone Temple Pilots record. I think they kind of have the formula down pat. The first 4 or 5 tracks, I mean, it sounds like SDP with a Scott Weiland clone, which is pretty much exactly what they were going for. But I think the band sounds pretty good. You know, I think the up-tempo rockers really work. I like Meadow, Just a Little Lie. But I think once kind of on the second half, the tempo starts to dip a little bit. They slow down. I think it kind of shows where they miss Scott Weiland the most. And they get a little uninteresting, a little repetitive. So it's a fine album. You know, it's Stone Temple Pilots light is what it is. And that's unfortunately, because Scott Weiland died, that's all you're probably ever going to get from them again.
Number 7 for me is also the 2018 self-titled album, although I think I like it, by the sounds of it, a little bit more than you guys. I think it comes out of the gate really strong. The first 5 tracks are awesome. I like them a lot. Back half is okay. It's a little bit STP by numbers, but it's still good. I enjoy it. The biggest weakness of this record for me is the mix. It sounds kind of muddy, but overall, I think it's about as good as you could have hoped for from an STP record without Scott Weiland on it.
Yeah, I think it's obvious that the first 5 records are the standouts here. I had trouble placing my 7 and 6, which is between the 2010 one and the newest one. I'm going to go with my number 7 spot with the self-titled 2010. I do think it's a better album as a whole than their newest one, Perdida. But I do think, like Jason said, this is kind of STP by numbers. I really don't like Between the Lines. I think this is what, you know, a producer or a record exec was like, this is what STP sounds like, so we're going to flush this out. I do kind of like some of like the country-ish and like early Beatles pop style of this, although I do think it's too sweet at time with like Cinnamon, you know, You've Got to Be the Prettiest Girl I've Ever Witnessed in the Whole World. I don't know if that's dirty enough for my STP taste. I kind of like Bagman. I like Hazy Days. I do think this suffers from a real lack of sonic variety. It sounds like it's really minimalist, where I think some of the strength of STP is in their variety and sort of their tapestry of all of the sounds that they love from 60s and glam. And, they always kind of sound like Zeppelin or the Doors or the Stones at times. This doesn't really have it. It seems like a fairly watered down version, but they're pros and they do their stuff really well. So it's definitely not a garbage record.
Well, I completely disagree. This is probably the biggest surprise is where that record ranks on my list. And we're not there yet. We're actually it breaks my heart to put this record here, but my number 6 is going to be number 4. I mean, I loved this album for a long time. On subsequent re-listens, it sounds so kind of its era. I really don't like Down or No Way Out. I think Scott was kind of trying a little too hard maybe to kind of right the ship and make a more, mainstream album after Tiny Music. But it just, it's really inconsistent for me. I like a lot of it. I like Sour Girl. I like Glide. I like Atlanta. Church on Tuesday. The weirder stuff I think really works, but it's when they kind of get bogged down in like the barking vocals and the little bit too much of the tough guy attitude. Didn't connect for me this time. I'm not sure why. That sucks because it has Sour Girl, which got me into music. So I wanted to put this higher. It was one of the first albums I ever bought, but it just whatever reason didn't connect for me this time.
My number 6 is going to be Core. I think this go around through the discography, definitely the weakest of the original like STP, the first 5 record era. His vocals would improve a lot. He stays in his low register a lot more on the first 2 records, which I don't care for as much. The songwriting's a little generic. You can see where the critics are coming from when they say they're just kind of riding the coattails of some of these other bigger grunge bands. I mean, there's quality songs on here, and you can see why so many of them get played on the radio still. But for me, it's a far less interesting record than pretty much everything else that came after it.
My number 6 is the newest. I'm with you guys that Perdida, which is my number 6. I don't really think it works as an album as a whole. It's not a really great listen to get through from start to finish, mainly because there's almost no tempo changes at all. The album plays very one note, but I do find it really interesting right from the start. It's very unexpected for them. I didn't really read anything about it going in, so as soon as like 20 seconds in, I was like, this is unlike anything I've heard from SDP. Obviously not one of my favorite, but I kind of love the weathered and weary country folk aspect. I love the introduction of instruments you don't hear on other SDP albums, like flute, female backing vocals, piano a little bit. I think this album and the songs on it would have been really cool to hear Weiland in this direction. Like if you were going to go see STP live now, and like say for Fantasy Circumstance, they still had Scott, it would have been cool to hear some of these songs kind of fluttered in the set list. So I like the songs as individuals more than the album as a whole. And I do kind of admire that it's different than any other album. So it was tough between number 6 and number 7. So I think for those reasons of kind of the different approach to it, I'm putting it number 6. I did really like She's My Queen and 3 Wishes fairly well. Pretty good. Not great. I just found it a little more interesting. And maybe because I've listened to a lot of STP in my life, it was nice just to hear a little bit of a change up. I do feel like this is a weak defense of it, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as Jason says. So
it's your list, Ryan. You can do whatever you want. My list has the self-titled from 2010 at number 5. I really like this record, especially the first half. Actually, pretty much the whole thing now that I look at the track list. I think it has a real nice groove. It's kind of 70s, almost a little Aerosmith in there. I hear from the guitar work. It's kind of does away with the sort of early 2000s, yelling kind of low voice that Scott Weiland did. He's kind of grooving more, using his voice better, maybe closer to Tiny Music. I think the first 5 songs in particular, they're just really kind of cool rock songs. I think they just have a really good beat, just strong, kind of interesting guitar work. It sucks that Scott Weiland's dead, because I think if they had built off this, they could have kind of had an entirely new career. That's almost 30 years after their original debut. So I feel like they weren't done. So it kind of sucks that this was the last one with Scott, because I think it definitely signals a new kind of cool direction for the band.
Number 5 for me is going to be Shangri-La-De-Da. This is an interesting record. Back in the day when I used to listen to SDP a lot more frequently, I always thought of this as the weakest of the first 5 records, with maybe just 1 or 2 really standout tracks. And then the first time I listened through the discography this week, it kind of blew me away. I really enjoyed listening through it, and I was kind of leaning towards putting it at number 3 on the list. But then this morning, going back through it again, it didn't do much for me. So it's kind of a hard one to figure out. I do think it's definitely better than I used to think it was. The songs are pretty catchy. I think the slower songs are kind of cool too. There's a chunk in the middle of the record where it kind of slows down, and some of those tunes are pretty cool, like Black Again and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to make heads or tails of this. I think it's solid, probably better than most people think it is, but not elite level like I maybe thought it was for a day or two.
Get into the top 5. I recommend all of these top 5. They're the first 5 SDP records. It does, so, naturally it hurts to put any of them this low, but I'm going with number 4 as my number 5. I'm with Joe. I think me and Joe hear this exactly the same way. I don't necessarily dislike kind of that aggressive, low register barking, like Joe put it, Scott Weiland performance, but I don't really think it's necessary by now, given the direction that the album's preceding this went. And it's just like when you shed the light on what you're capable of and then you kind of take a step back, even if it's good, it can be a little disappointing. So that's how number 4 kind of operates in my mind. Down and Heaven and Hot Rods, they're all right. I don't like No Way Out or Church on Tuesday, and among the first 5 albums there are very few songs that I just flat up don't like, but those are 2 of them, and they're found on this album. So it's kind of an album of highs and lows for me. The highs are super high, like Sour Girl, I Got You, Glide. I love Atlanta as the closer, but as far as just kind of that thick, meaty bass and guitar kind of playing the same thing a little bit too much for me, I think it's safely not as good as the 4 I've got above it, even though I like it a good bit. So,
all right. I guess that brings me to my number 4, which is Shangri-La-De-Da. Kind of with Jason on this. I bought it when it came out. I was really into SDP, and it kind of disappointed me back then a little bit. Maybe I was expecting too much. This is when, SDP was probably my favorite band at the time. And it felt a little too relaxed, maybe. But I don't know. Listening to it now, I think it kind of corrects some of the stuff that was weak with number 4. Doesn't have, that barky, shouty vocal. I think it has their best ballads on it. I think it's Scott Weiland's best kind of slow, dreamy-esque pop kind of stuff that he was doing. The lyrics are real personal, kind of real self, searching, soul-searching kind of stuff. But I think it rocks hard enough. Hollywood Bitch and Days of the Week are real good rockers. It probably doesn't have the highs and lows of some of the other stuff, but I think it's really consistently good kind of all the way through. It's sort of weird enough, I think, for SDP. Listening to it again now, it definitely have a higher place in my discography.
Number 4 for me is going to be the self-titled 2010 record. This record, when it came out, it's not that I didn't like it, but I was kind of dismissive of it. Around that time, I wasn't really listening to very much hard rock at all. I was into like Wilco and stuff like that. I bought it when it came out. I listened to it maybe twice and never listened to it again until recently. But man, I found it to be awesome this time around. I don't know what you don't like about Between the Lines, but I think that song is killer. And so is pretty much every song on it. I really like a lot. Doesn't quite stack up to the 3 records I have ahead of it, but for when it came out and what it is and where they were at in their lives and in their career, I think it's awesome.
Well, to each their own, Jason. Because of you putting this above Core, you will not be getting a Christmas card in December. Number 4, for me, this is tough. I really, like Jason, wanted to put this higher. Just the other 3 are really good. And like with Joe as well, the album that really surprised me is Shangri-La-De-Da. Very close to my number 3. My number 3 selection edges it out just because some of the highlights are better just by a little bit. This album is really good all the way through. It has a really nice, they had already started on Tiny Music doing this Beatles-esque kind of vibe. And I think it's really littered all over here. Really catchy, clever lyrics, but it's also kind of glammy. I do think it suffers from a little too much soft nature to it. It could have used a little more thump to it. And I really don't like Coma. I hate that this album was 2001, I believe. And I think I mentioned this when we talked about Aerosmith and Just Push Play. It's got that really stupid, cheap scratch noise hook effect to it. I don't really like it. It sounds very dated to me. But I think Wonderful, Black Again, Hello, It's Late, Too Cool, Queenie. The standout to me is Bipolar Bear. We'll be talking about that again on my songs list. It's got a really cool, just kind of like Summer in the Shadows feel. It's about as bright as you can get with STP without being incredibly just lathered in rays of sunshine. And I think his chameleon-esque vocals on this are great. He does a lot of different stuff. I really wanted this to be number 3, but I just couldn't. And probably back when I heard it, I was probably in my mind, like, I definitely like number 4 more than this, but now easily better than number 4, I think. So I was pleasantly surprised. I think I re-listened to this maybe 5 years ago or so, and I liked it a little more, but right now I'm like really digging it. So my number 4, Shangri-La-De-Da.
All right. My number 3 is going to be Core, the debut, the one that the critics just absolutely savaged. They had just terrible things to say about Stone Temple Pilots in this record. And I'll say I really like it. I think there's just something interesting about this one. Maybe it's not interesting. Maybe it's just good songs. I think that's kind of what holds this one up. Maybe they came into this one without thinking about the critics. They just put down what they had. To announce the band like they do with a bullhorn on Dead and Bloated, I think is just awesome. I think that's an incredible way to start a debut album. Sex Type Thing, which critics hated because they thought it was serious instead of kind of a satirical look at misogyny in the rock industry. Critics really just didn't think they had that kind of nuance in them. It's a powerful rocker. Wicked Garden, Creep, Plush, and you're probably sick of these songs. Anyone who listens to the radio, any type of alternative station is going to hear these songs all the time. And that almost influenced me to drop this record down a little bit, but thinking back of how much I liked all these songs throughout my teens and 20s, I had it kind of vaulted back up to my top 3. I think it's just a really solid rock album that gets unfairly criticized and lumped in with Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And it's similar, but it has their own style, and I think it's very good.
Number 3 for me is going to be Purple. Really good record. Hard to put it at number 3 even because it's so classic. You got Interstate Love Song, Big Empty, other great tracks like Loungefly and Unglued. I think for a lot of people, this would probably be their number 1s. For me, the thing that holds it back a little bit is just I feel like they haven't quite found their own sound yet. They're on their way to it and they're getting close, but Scott Weiland is still mostly singing in his chest voice, and I really like it more when he sings up in his head voice. Guitar tone-wise, they're just kind of playing thick, chunky guitar sounds, and I think on Tiny Music they start playing around a lot more with tone and doing interesting things with production. And I think they find themselves more right after this, or they're getting close to it here, but it's not quite the sound I think of when I think of what I want to hear from STP.
Yeah, I agree completely. My number 3 is also Purple. It's about to be their best work. It's kind of like their warm-up effort. The hooks have arrived. You've got that just nice melting pot of all the 60s influences. I love bands that are just almost constantly paying homage to other stuff. And I kind of feel that way with them here. I think they'll do it even more in a little bit. But yeah, there's really not a bad song on here. I love Meat Plow, Vaseline, Loungefly, Interstate Love Song, Pretty Penny's cool, Big Empty's awesome. And I think it's really admirable that, this doesn't really sound much like core, other than what Jason said, with a little bit thicker guitars and the chest voice, as you say, with Scott Weiland. But I think as far as the songwriting and sort of the attitude and the ambience of this album is much different than core. And I think this is also when DeLeo on bass is really starting to go wild a little bit. He's starting to really take off. You can hear an Interstate Love Song and some other stuff. Really, really good album. My top 3 are all 5 out of 5 stars to me. I love them.
Well, let's just continue this purple party here. I got purple at my number 2. I think you guys mostly covered it. It is kind of like a continuation of core, but I think they're, it's just better across the board, better songs, better playing. Interstate Love Song bass line on that and Big Empty is just outrageously good. Maybe it doesn't have a track that rates as highly for me as core and Tiny Music, but I think consistency is, every track is good. There's no songs that I'm finding myself skipping on this one. I think they all kind of have their cool own parts to them. I love Lounge Fly, real kind of angry, dirty song. It's a great track. I even like the hidden track at the end on Kitchenware and Candy Bars with the lounge singer, kind of, just singing about the album. I think that's kind of a fun way to cap off everything.
My number 2 is number 4. I kind of get what you guys are saying about the aggressive, almost like borderline new metal type of thing going on this record, but I think it's awesome. I don't know, they kind of take what they did on Tiny Music and they add this aggression to it, but it doesn't come across to me as like aggro or anything like that. It's got so much swagger. It's still kind of like, I don't know, glammy in a way, but it's like heavier than glam. I think it's real interesting, and I think the songwriting's great. Yeah, I think it's really good.
I had a feeling this would be high on your list because the way I hear it, it's kind of like T-Rex does grunge at times. So
yeah. I love glam, as everyone will soon find out as we head into the 70s on our albums of the year list. But it's not glam, but there's a lot of glam, and it's really just the attitude of this record that I love.
All right, getting to my number 2. This was tough because technically we call these lists our favorite albums. Objectively, I think this is their best album, but if I'm being totally honest with myself, it's not my favorite. So number 2 for me is going to be Tiny Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop.
I thought we had it. I thought we had a trifecta.
I did too. I was already kind of getting the trophy ready.
When I was writing it down, I had it at 1 and scratched it off, and I had a moment where I lit a candle and looked in the mirror and was like, Ryan, you know what it is. So this, you can call this the best album that SCP has done, and I won't disagree with you. I was on Purple talking about the constant homages. It's all over the place here. It's a tapestry of music they love. There's some psychedelia, there's some folk, there's a little bit of country, there's straight up rock, there's bossa nova. You can kind of hear the Doors, the Stones, Zeppelin, Elvis Costello, the Beatles. It's awesome. Clever pop lyrics, really good chorus. I mean, in Big Bang Baby, you got the crash, crash, crash. It's basically lifted from Jumpin' Jack Flash, but I don't mind it whatsoever. That said, I really hate that I started off talking about all the homages here because it's a really unique and interesting album, and they've found their sound. Their artistry is 100% here. Right off the bat with Press Play, the just little groovy, jazzy bass, loungy awesomeness, Big Bang Baby, and So I Know. And So I Know, when we do our songs list, that was my number 11. Had to cut it. Trippin' on a Hole, one of the best rock songs of the 90s, if you ask me. It's awesome. Art School Girl, yeah, it's a unique album. It's kind of the perfect blend of their creativity and their noise. It's great, but my favorite is a different album. So a very strong number 2, basically a 1A, Tiny Music. Sorry, we're not going to get the Triple Crown, but honesty is more important than anything.
Moving on to the best Stone Temple Pilots album, also my favorite, Tiny Music. I can't even imagine kind of what people thought of this album when it came out. Like this must have blown people's mind that SDP, who, had an incredibly successful career already in grunge, post-grunge or whatever, with their first 2 albums would just completely changed the whole game, I think, of their entire sound. There's little tendrils of what they used to kind of be like, but the influences on here, the 60s and the 70s, and the glam and the Beatles, and they mess around with shoegaze practically on some of this stuff, real kind of arty pop sounds, and it works. Every track I think on here is just kind of a new adventure, a new sound. The playing is phenomenal. I think the guitar sounds the best of any of their albums. The bass playing is phenomenal. Tripping on a Hole in a Paper Heart is ridiculous bass line. I recommend really kind of listening to it because it kind of blew my mind the first time I heard it. It was one of the songs, that I first learned on bass. It was kind of like, okay, if I can learn Tripping on a Hole in a Paper Heart, then I can play anything. And it's just, everything. I just love it. Adhesive. They throw in a trumpet solo and just out of the blue. And I think it totally fits. It's just everything they do here works. I love the punky kind of glam. I mean, I don't even know what to call some of the influences they bring in. It doesn't sound like anything else really that's ever been recorded, I think. Definitely didn't sound like their other stuff. And it's just a really cool album. You really just have to hear it to kind of get the weird sonic, just everything on here works for me.
It's kind of like their Sgt. Pepper almost to me.
For me, it's just such a clear favorite, even though I really like SDP as a whole. This album was always number one. There was never a chance of it dipping below.
To me, it's more like their White Album because they're like jumping around through all these different genres, and I don't know songwriting wise if it's their best record. I think there's songs like Art School Girl aren't like necessarily well-written songs, but they work within the context of the album. The guitar tones, like you said, are great on this record. Not doing the expected kind of heavy rock guitar sounds that were really big at the time. He kind of flips it around and you got all these kind of really like small, tiny music guitar tones, and it just works. It sits nicely on top of the bass and the drums, and just sounds really cool. It's a little glammy, it's a little punky, it's a little jazzy. It's just really unique. And to me, this is the STP sound. When I think of what they sound like, this is the record I think of.
Yeah, that leaves me with my number one, which we know is Core. But I do want to talk a little bit more about Tiny Music because it's awesome. And like I said, objectively, their best. But Jason, if you don't think this album has their best songwriting on it, what album do you think does?
Either Four or Purple. Probably Purple.
All right.
If they made Purple with this production, it would easily be their best record.
I don't know if I agree with that, but I see what you're saying. The reason why Core is my number one is, first of all, I think it's very unfairly lumped in with Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Nirvana. I don't hear it. This album is very mysterious to me in such a good way. It's venomous. Wyland seems like infected, and I could catch it listening to this album. It's very violent. It just kind of conjures up like this bloody sludge drugginess that I just find really seedy and awesome, and it's also kind of sad because of it. I think this album has a really nice examples of little pieces, which are technically songs or tracks, that enhance the album, like Wet My Bed and No Memory, just little 90-second little clips of nature and atmosphere. And then I think because it has a really nice grunge growl, I will say that, and it works so well with Dead and Bloated and Wicked Garden. Plush, I like Plush a lot. I probably can't name a song in my life I've heard more than Plush, but it stands the test of time. Creep is great, Sex Type Thing, I think I said. Naked, Sin. It's just, as a whole, the sound and the feel of this album is unlike anything else. It's kind of sinful and sinister and dirty, and I like it. It almost does what rock and roll, or at least hard rock, is supposed to do, where it seduces you into their ideology or their thinking, and it kind of does for me. I can listen to this straight through and come out the other side with a completely different feeling, and After listening to this album, my disposition will be totally altered, and I think that's what's really impressive about it. Again, objectively, I think songwriting is better on Tiny Music and elsewhere, but just the nature of this album, I think, is really awesome, and it's got to be my number one. But I don't disagree with you guys on your picks. I think we're all in agreement, for the most part, that those first 4 albums, and surprisingly awesome Shangri-La-De-Da, is the really, really good era of I almost said Zeppelin, really good era of the Stone Temple Pilots. Those first 10 years, just awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into the listography of Stone Temple Pilots. Let us know what your lists are, what you thought of our lists. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. Joe, Jason, and myself will see you next time on Listography. Take care.